Wild Bill Hickok, one of the most iconic figures of the American frontier, lived a life that epitomized the virtues of courage, honor, and justice in a time and place where such qualities were rare and sorely needed. Born James Butler Hickok in 1837, he became a larger-than-life figure, immortalized in dime novels, Wild West shows, and the lore of the American frontier. As a lawman, sharpshooter, scout, and gambler, Hickok played an integral role in shaping the lawless territories of the West, all the while adhering to a strict personal code of honor that made him revered by his contemporaries. Hickok's reputation was built on a series of real and exaggerated exploits, but the kernel of truth remains. Wild Bill was a man of immense courage and skill. He participated in the Civil War as a Union scout and spy, earning a reputation for his bravery and strategic brilliance. His fame grew in the years that followed as he took on roles as a lawman, most famously as the Marshal of Abilene, Kansas, where he was known for his no-nonsense approach to maintaining order in a wild and often violent environment. Hickok was renowned for his prowess with firearms, particularly his ability to quickly and accurately draw his pistols in high-pressure situations. His most famous gunfight, the duel with Davis Tutt in 1865, cemented his legend. Hickok shot Tutt dead in the public square of Springfield, Missouri at a distance of approximately 75 yards, a remarkable feat that demonstrated his unparalleled skill. This act, though controversial, was seen by many as justified, as Hickok had confronted a man who had wronged him, adhering to the unwritten code of the frontier. Honor demanded that scores be settled face to face. But Wild Bill was more than just a gunman. He was also a man who believed in law and justice. Unlike many of his contemporaries who reveled in violence for its own sake, Hickok used his considerable talents to maintain order in some of the roughest parts of the West. His tenure as Marshal of Abilene, for example, was characterized by a firm hand that kept notorious outlaws at bay, while also ensuring that justice was served with a certain level of fairness. In Hickok, the people of the West saw not just a protector, but an embodiment of the law, a man who stood as a bulwark against chaos in a time when life was, as Thomas Hobbes might say, nasty, brutish, and short. It is against this backdrop that we must consider the cowardice of Jack McCall, the man who murdered Wild Bill Hickok. McCall, a drifter and gambler, shot Hickok in the back while the latter was seated at a poker table in Deadwood, South Dakota, in 1876. Hickok's final poker hand, aces and eights, now forever known as the dead man's hand, was still in his grip when McCall pulled the trigger. The shot ended not just the life of a legend, but also struck at the heart of the very values Hickok had come to represent: courage, honor, and the rule of law. McCall's act was the ultimate betrayal of the frontier code. He did not face Hickok in a fair fight, nor did he confront him with any semblance of honor. Instead, he took the coward's way out, shooting a man in the back, an act so deeply dishonorable that it outraged not only the citizens of Deadwood, but the entire frontier. McCall was tried twice for his crime, the first trial being a farcical miners' court that acquitted him. The second, more formal trial, held in the Dakota Territory, found him guilty, and McCall was sentenced to hang. The execution of Jack McCall was more than just a legal process. It was a deeply symbolic act. By hanging McCall, the authorities of the time were not just carrying out justice. They were making a statement about what happens to those who violate the sacred codes of honor and decency. But perhaps even more telling is the decision to bury McCall with the noose still around his neck, a decision that was likely made by those involved in the administration of his execution. The noose was left as a permanent marker of McCall's shame, a symbol that his death was not simply about removing a criminal from society, but about ensuring that his dishonor would be remembered for generations. This act of leaving the noose intact speaks to the emotional weight behind McCall's execution. It wasn't just about retribution for a crime. It was about moral outrage, about the community's need to express its collective disgust at McCall's betrayal. Wild Bill Hickok was a hero, and his murderer deserved not just death, but disgrace. There is a fascinating parallel between McCall's execution and the practice of burying certain individuals in bogs during ancient times. In northern Europe, particularly in areas like Denmark and Ireland, bog bodies have been found, remarkably preserved by the anaerobic conditions of the peat. Many of these bodies show signs of violent death, strangulation, stabbing, or blunt force trauma, and were often deposited in bogs as part of a ritualistic or punitive act. Much like McCall, these individuals were not just executed, they were disposed of in a way that marked their exclusion from society. Bogs, like the noose left on McCall, were a symbolic means of reinforcing the dishonor of the individual. In ancient societies, the bog may have represented a liminal space, a place between life and death, where criminals or transgressors could be ritually erased from the community. Just as McCall's noose was left to ensure that his disgrace lived on, the placement of bodies in bogs was a way of consigning these individuals to oblivion, ensuring that they would not be remembered in the same way as those given proper burials. One of the most striking aspects of the bog bodies is the gender disparity. The majority of these bodies are male. This mirrors the fate of many figures like Jack McCall, who, in both ancient and more modern societies, tend to be men involved in violent or transgressive acts. There is a certain practicality to this gendered pattern. In both ancient and frontier societies, men were more often the ones who transgressed societal norms, whether through violence, theft, or betrayal. The bogs, much like the gallows, were a practical solution to the problem of removing these disruptive elements from the community. But there's also a symbolic layer to this. The bog, like the noose, represents more than just a means of execution. It is a way of erasing an individual's moral impurity. In ancient societies, the bog served as a kind of dumping ground for the unclean or dishonorable, much like the burial of McCall with his noose symbolized his eternal shame. The bog bodies were not given proper burials because they were not deserving of the honor that came with such rites. They were, in a sense, thrown away, much like McCall was when he was buried with the mark of his dishonor still around his neck. The execution of Jack McCall and the burial of bog bodies are separated by time and culture, but they share a common theme: the need to symbolically and practically remove individuals who violate the deepest norms of society. Whether in the ancient world or the American frontier, individuals like McCall and the men found in bogs were not simply criminals. They were transgressors of a moral order. Their deaths were not just punitive but symbolic, serving as a way to ensure that their dishonor was remembered and that they were excluded from the moral community. In both cases, the gender disparity reflects the practical realities of who was most likely to commit acts of violence or transgression. Men, in both ancient and frontier societies, were more often involved in violent acts, and their executions were seen as necessary to maintain social order. The practical significance of bogs and gallows alike was to remove these dangerous individuals, but the symbolic significance was even greater. These individuals were consigned to places that ensured their moral erasure. Whether it was the gallows or the bog, the message was clear: they were not worthy of the community's respect, either in life or in death. Wild Bill Hickok's story, then, serves as a lens through which we can understand the broader human need to deal with transgressors in both practical and symbolic ways. His life was a testament to the values of honor, courage, and justice, and his death, though tragic, revealed the moral outrage that societies feel when those values are violated. Jack McCall's execution, like the burial of bog bodies, was about more than just justice. It was about ensuring that those who betray the deepest norms of society are forever marked by their shame.